This is July 31st, 2014, and I am interviewing Dr. Elizabeth Naftalis, and my name is Pauline Graivier with the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. And good afternoon, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon.
I'm so glad that you have agreed to be interviewed for our records and for people who want to study what's happening in the Jewish community in Dallas. And so sometimes nobody will look at what we have, and sometimes a lot of people will look at what we have. And so I'm so glad that you have agreed to be interviewed. Tell me a little bit about your background. Where do you come from, and why did you decide to come to Dallas?
Well, I grew up in El Paso, Texas. Had a great childhood there. It was really a wonderful place to grow up. And went to undergraduate at Tulane University. Knew for a long time I wanted to be a physician. Then I went to University of Texas at Houston, where I met my husband, Richard. Richard had matched in the neurosurgery match a year ahead of me at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So I went as a senior medical student and did a rotation with the chairman there and got to know him, and then went ahead and put down my match preferences, and fortunately matched at the same program where my husband was. So we got married in El Paso, and then I moved to Birmingham to be with him, and we did our residencies there, and then moved back to Dallas in 1991.
And you did your residency in what?
I did my residency in general surgery.
And then you came to Dallas, and I believe you told me you were already pregnant.
I was pregnant during my chief year, and fortunately the residents that I worked with were really wonderful and would help me cover call or help me cover really long operations if I needed it. And so we moved back here, and I was probably about 6 months pregnant, 6 or 7 months pregnant. And then we had our oldest child after we moved back here the end of September.
And did you keep on with your residency here?
No, we had already finished. We had already finished. So we had our first child, and then basically what I did is I started in practice, and initially had privileges at St. Paul for a little bit, but also got privileges at Presbyterian and moved into an office over at Presbyterian.
Now, I know that you specialized in women's issues, particularly breast surgery. Tell me about that. How did you decide to do that?
Well, interestingly enough, during my residency, my mother was actually diagnosed with breast cancer. So I had a special interest in breast during my residency. At the time that I finished, there were not very many breast fellowships, and they weren't recognized by any particular organization. Interestingly enough, fast forward to 2003 when I was at UT Southwestern, and there was a consortium of organizations, the Society of Surgical Oncologists, American Society of Breast Surgeons, and American Society of Breast Disease, and they finally decided to come together and have a certificate that they would award for breast fellowships. And Southwestern, UT Southwestern, where I was on faculty and I was the head of the fellowship program, was the first program in the country to be recognized and to receive the certificate.
That's very interesting, because I never knew that at all. How
Yes.
interesting.
So I sort of, I guess, grandfathered, or I guess you could say grandmothered into the breast surgery position.
Excellent. And so I know that you are a specialist in that. And I want to get back to the medical career in just a little bit, but
Okay.
Before I do, this is a record of sorts for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, and And you and your husband Richard are both Jewish and members of Temple Emmanuel.
Correct.
And I noticed that you are active in the Jewish, what am I trying to say, the National Council of Jewish Women, and so on. So tell me about your experiences. Here you are, a young mother, you have 2 more children, you're working, but you are still a member of the Jewish community. Was that an easy thing? Did your children go to Sunday school? I mean, what type of interaction did you have with the Jewish community?
Well, the Jewish community, first of all, I have to say that sisterhood at Temple Emmanuel was very welcoming and very good to me when I first moved here, and they got me involved in committees that had to do with Temple and the community, but they also were good about asking me to come and speak on panels as a professional. So I worked with them both as a community member as well as a professional. I was also reached out to by the National Council of Jewish Women. I've been involved with them some, as well as
Federation?
the Federation. I've also worked with the Federation and Jewish Family Services as well. I've done Meals on Wheels, as well as talked to, I believe they have a support group, if I'm remembering correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just been different sectors in the Jewish community, but I have found all of the Jewish community really to be very welcoming to us, both personally and professionally. As far as our children were, they all went to preschool at Akiba. So they had a good basis, and we used to try and follow that into the home by doing some Shabbat dinners and so forth. Mm-hmm. But then they went to both public and private schools, and at that point they started going to Sunday school when they were, I guess, in elementary school. And 2 of our 3 children went all the way through to getting confirmed, and all 3 of our children were bar and bat mitzvahed.
So you have, good heavens, that's excellent. I'm always so glad to hear that, because sometimes people will say they weren't welcomed, but obviously if you're going to be welcomed, you have to put yourself out and you have to be willing to do things. It's my personal opinion on that.
I agree with that.
Excellent. So tell us now, we can go back to your medical career.
Okay.
Which sounds like it's been pretty far-reaching. So now you retired from your own practice, and then with the University of Texas Southwestern.
So I left Presbyterian, where I was in private practice for academics in 2000, and was there almost through the end of 2004, where I was involved in not just seeing patients in the private sector, but also helping out with patients at Parkland, as well as doing teaching with medical students, residents, as well as the fellowship. I was very involved in the breast fellowship.
That's very exciting. What a broad range from private to academic. What's been the most fascinating to you?
I enjoyed the academics, I would say, because of all the different factors. There was also research involved. I forgot to mention research, because of both the patient care as well as the education piece and the research piece. And I'm still involved with a group that I do research with.
So what have been the challenges in your life, either professional or personal? What would you say has been some of them? We all have challenges, so.
I would say probably the biggest challenge as an educated woman, and you know this as well, is trying to find the right balance between raising your children, taking care of your household, and yet still being a professional and being able to do that well. And I think that that we all, have to find our way and struggle with that. There are people you can hire to do certain aspects of it, but nobody can really be the mother except for the mother. And I think that that's difficult. And I think that it's a different challenge than men have. Because the mother generally is the nurturer in the household. And it's hard to put your finger on exactly what nurturing is, but I feel like that's been the biggest challenge for me anyway. Maybe, I know it's not for every woman, but not every woman feels like they need to be there to nurture their family. Some prefer to have their partner or their spouse do it, but for me, that is a challenge. And I'm also, as a physician, I'm also a nurturer, so that's been difficult.
I think that I have to agree with you. And as a matter of fact, when you say not everyone feels that way, I will tell you from being in the professional world that yes, most of them do. There are very few who don't feel that surge of guilt or whatever. I'm not sure what to call it.
Right. So in raising daughters, which you've done so well, and I'm working on, but I have a daughter who, is planning to be a professional. So it's hard. I definitely want her to pursue her career, but it's hard to be able to explain to her that she is going to have to face that challenge at some point.
If she wants a life like you've had, which is married and children, but not everyone wants a life like that.
But I think she does. I think she wants a family. So so we're still talking about that and working on that. So
now you come from a 2-physician family. Your husband Richard
Correct.
is a neurosurgeon.
Correct.
And is he gone a great deal, or does he have that into control?
He is gone a great deal, and with most 2-physician families, especially surgeons, if you both have 730 cases and the nanny doesn't show up, guess who leaves the house? And guess whose shoulders it falls onto? And that's okay. I don't have an issue with that, but that's just the way that it is, and I don't know that will change. I mean, it's different if I had to leave early and the housekeeper didn't come, he certainly would stay until the housekeeper showed up. But that's one of those challenges that I'm talking about. So yeah, it can be a little bit tough.
And now back to the Jewish part of it. Of course, we Jews stress so much the being in the community, helping others, of the family being together and so on. With general surgery, and which you were in while you are specializing in breast surgery, it's still the general surgery, so there's
Correct. That's what my boards are in. Correct.
yeah, so there are emergencies, there are seeing people on call, making rounds and so on. Did you ever find that one was interfering with another to a great deal? Even the years that your kids were studying for their bar and bat mitzvahs?
Yes and no. I wouldn't say that they interfered, but I just felt pulled. Sometimes I felt pulled, and I felt like one or the other wasn't getting enough attention that it needed to. And so typically to compensate, you wind up working later hours at night or later hours on the weekend or something like that. So It's difficult. I know that, now there's this new lean in, but it's still difficult. On a personal level, it's still difficult to feel that you can do everything and be there for everybody and fulfill everybody's expectations. I think you can still do multiple jobs and have multiple roles, but I think it's hard for somebody who's a little bit of a perfectionist to feel like you've done everything well.
Yes, I hear you.
Mhm.
I hear you. Are any of your kids, by the way, I know your daughter wants to be an attorney.
Correct.
Are any of them going into medicine? What about the two boys?
Possibly our youngest. I haven't gotten much of a feel. I think our middle one wants to go into business, but possibly our youngest is considering medicine. He's still a little young. He's getting ready to go. He's going to be a senior in high school. Unfortunately, now some of the rules have changed because I was able to do some work in the hospital when I was a teenager and knew at an early age that I wanted to go into medicine, but now there's a lot of regulations that won't let kids before the age of 18 be very involved in the hospital. So, and he just turned 18. So unfortunately, I think if he had been able to be around in the hospital a little bit more, he'd have a better understanding of that.
Is so many legalities of
There are. They won't, you can't take anybody in the operating room now who is under the age of 18, and even if they are 18, there's certain waivers you have to sign. Part of it's because of HIPAA, and I understand that for the patient's protection, but it's gotten a little bit more difficult.
So that does make it difficult when you're raising a kid and you want to give them those kind of experiences to see what mom and dad do. How about socially? Did you find many of your friends who are stay-at-home moms, which is certainly a very fine profession? Did you find that many of them understood where you were coming from?
When I was working or when I stopped working?
When you're working.
I think they did. It's interesting because there are many women that I'm friendly with now that are professionals that opted not to work to raise their family. So I have a lot of friends that are physicians, attorneys, business women, have MBAs, that all got educated, but then at some point opted to stop to be able to be at home to raise their children. So.
And after their children were raised, have you any firsthand experience? Because you're about to have it in another year.
So some women have chosen to go on and get other degrees. Some women have opted to go back to work. Some women went part-time and then went back to full-time, and some women volunteer. So it's sort of variable. It's sort of all over the board as to what women are doing. And I guess what I haven't really gotten into with a lot of women is how much they've pursued it, because as you know, sometimes when women try and get back in the workforce, they're put at an entry-level position, and they say, well, that's just not worth my time or energy to go in at an entry-level position.
That's very true, and it's very understandable.
Correct.
Now, what kind of influences did you have growing up? I know that you did not grow up in Dallas, so can you tell us anything? This is historical, so I would like to know where your family came from, what its background is, and what kind of influences did you have as a child?
So my parents were...
Let's try to ignore that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have turned it off.
The mafia is showing up now.
Yes.
So my parents moved to El Paso when I was an infant. And I had been born in Louisiana, which is where my mother was from, and she was actually of Italian descent. She had a degree in dietetics and met my father in Houston when she was doing an internship. And my father is also a neurosurgeon. So he was starting his residency in Houston. And that's where they met, and then they got married. And then moved to, after he finished his residency, they moved to El Paso. So I was raised in El Paso, which was great. It was a very warm, welcoming community. Not as many border issues as we have now. And it's interesting because I've run into several people in Dallas who I grew up with them or their family or their siblings from El Paso who are here in Dallas. As far as religion is concerned, I was actually raised Catholic. My father was raised Muslim. And I used to tell my mom, I had a very good friend who lived across the street, and I used to go spend all the Jewish holidays with them. And growing up, I used to tell my mom I wanted to be Jewish. So I married, so before Richard and I got married, I went through a conversion and converted, and we got married by a rabbi in El Paso.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
But isn't that funny? I used to go spend the Jewish holidays with my friend and came home and told my mother I wanted to be Jewish, and look at what happened.
After this is over, I'll tell you something very coincidental about
Okay.
that.
Okay.
How wonderful. Well, you certainly had definite influences guiding you there.
Well, my parents were always very accepting of people, and it may be because they were of such different faiths.
Yeah.
And we had friends of many faiths in El Paso, and the Jewish community is very tight-knit there, which you probably know from so many of the families that are here now that had been in El Paso or related to people in El Paso. So anyway, I think it just takes a lot of open-mindedness, and hopefully we're passing that along to our children, because we can't really have peace in this world or on this earth until we can teach everybody to accept others.
And one wonders whether that's ever going to
If
happen.
it's ever going to happen.
But
right.
it's wonderful that you and Richard have done that, and obviously
Right.
have given your children that kind of advantage.
Yes. And
Understanding that it can be done.
right. So, so my children have come up with very interesting terms, such as we essentially celebrate Hanukkah, but they also know that we do a little bit of Christmas sometimes if my parents are here. I have a sister who lives here, so my daughter calls it Christmas Hanukkah. That we do some Christmas Hanukkah. So they know that they're Jewish, but they know that they've got Christian relatives. So.
And what about Muslim?
My father basically didn't really continue his faith, and he sort of goes with whatever my mother is doing. So if my mother goes to church, he'll go to church with her. So I haven't really seen him practice in a long time. I don't know, I think faith and prayer can be a very personal thing, so I don't know, necessarily who he prays to, but he does go with my mother. And of course they participated in all of our children's mitzvahs and so forth, so.
So they had no trouble with your conversion.
They did not. They were very open and agreeable to it, so.
That's wonderful.
Yes, no, they were wonderful.
That's very exciting. So coming into Dallas then, you must have had some qualms, but you sort of had an open door because of your profession. You and the children going to school. You're going to bound to make a lot of friends. through them and through your profession.
That's correct. We did. So we got to know, really, we've gotten to know so many people in Dallas. Some of them were people that Richard knew, growing up. He knew a lot of family. As you know, your husband was just a wonderful mentor to him as he was growing up. So there were a lot of families that we knew here and that we've connected with and reconnected with. And it's just really been a very warm, opening community. Open community. So, like I said, people have really just opened their arms to us. So it's been very good.
What you're doing now is so interesting to me because you are not in private practice anymore, but you are still giving back to the community. Could you share something about that with us?
Yes, I actually volunteer at the Family Medicine Clinic on Worth Street, which is a family medicine clinic that's part of Baylor. And I volunteer for Health Texas, which is sort of the physician group that Baylor hires. But I volunteer my time, and I see women that are on what's called Baylor Care, which is Baylor's way of giving back to the community. It's women that are either unfunded or underfunded or underinsured or not insured. So I see these women and see them for breast problems. I do minor procedures in the clinic and then help, treat them, diagnose them, get them sorted out, and then figure out what needs to be done next.
What a wonderful way to give back to the community.
I enjoy it. I really still enjoy. That was the hardest part about taking the hiatus that I had, was missing the interaction with the patients as well as the staff. I've always enjoyed working with staff as well. But this is very rewarding because these are women that don't have a lot of resources, and I don't just mean financial. Sometimes they don't have good family support. Sometimes they're in terrible home situations. Even just getting to the clinic can be a major ordeal for them. They may not have a ride. They may not have fare for the bus. So it feels good. I enjoy working with the community in that way.
You told me you were doing some other kind of volunteer work. Is this your major volunteer effort?
That's my major volunteer effort. Of course, I still do volunteer work for the school, and I've done volunteer work on and off for example, the Medical Society. But right now, this is the major volunteer work that I'm doing.
For the school, you mean Southwestern Medical School?
No, actually, St. Mark's.
Oh, it's St. Mark's.
Where our youngest son goes to school.
Oh, okay. Okay. How interesting. Good.
Yes.
A boys' school.
A boys' school, yes. So, still involved there for at least another year.
Okay. Well, of course, if your son is there, that
Yes.
makes sense. Baylor is a private hospital system.
Correct, but I believe it's not for profit, if I recall correctly.
I think
Don't
you're
quote
right.
me on that. And they provide a certain percentage of the care that they provide is charity care. And I don't know if that's in their charter. I'm not sure what that's in, but they provide a certain amount of charity care for the community. And they actually have 10 clinics similar to the one that I work in. So occasionally we get referrals from some of these other outlying clinics.
Mm-hmm.
This is the main one that's at the big Baylor campus.
Mm-hmm.
But they see a lot of patients in the community. So they have a lot of clinics around the area and see a lot of patients that are underserved in the community.
That's excellent, Elizabeth. It makes me feel really good. And of course, that's such a basis. That Baylor, of course, is a Baptist university, but of course, being Jewish, we know what our charge is to make the world a better place or save
Correct.
the world and so on. So I find that particularly gratifying that I'm sure you find it gratifying.
No, it's really very, very gratifying. It's wonderful being able to, touch these women that don't necessarily have another place to go.
Do you find yourself counseling them as well? If they come to you for a medical problem, they're generally going to feel close enough to you to confide in you. So you, I'm sure, have to become multi-disciplinary.
So that's also part of what I enjoy about caring for patients, just generally, but in this particular area, yes, I do find that I do hear more about some of their other issues, and sometimes that's all a patient needs. Maybe a woman comes in and she's having breast pain, but she has had something terrible happen in her personal life, and by her just being able to verbalize it to somebody who's willing to listen, it's amazing how sometimes their breast pain gets better even though I didn't necessarily do anything, but just because I was there to listen to what their issues are, they feel better.
I can understand that. It's when you hear something that should be possibly reported to the police, that must be very challenging to you, because if she doesn't want it reported, then you can hardly do anything about that.
Well, if they've broken the law and I know something that they've been done, for example, we're mandated reporters. In other words, if I know that there is child abuse or elder abuse or something like that, we have to report it by law. We're required to report it by law. So anything like that, yes. Something such as I may have shared with you that, I've got patients occasionally who come in who use substances, and, we can counsel them, but I may not necessarily be able to get them to stop the substance or do anything like that. Now, if they were, well, I don't even want to get into the possibilities, but yeah, if I knew that they were doing something illegal and I needed to report it, I would.
That's a tough call. That's a tough call, because physicians are not always trained in that kind of social work or psychotherapy or
Right.
anything like that. So you've really applied all of your woman that you said earlier, that women are nurturers.
Right. And some of our intuition, but I've gotten a couple of patients to quit smoking who started smoking as teenagers and have been able to, talk to them and work with them, and, just little things
That's
like that
satisfying.
can be gratifying. I feel like the only way you're going to change is sort of one patient at a time.
That's an interesting statement.
Mhm.
Yes, I suppose that is that way on everything, on every level.
That's right.
Yeah.
So although, a book can be written about a certain subject, losing weight or stopping smoking or something like that, unless you can actually apply it to each patient, right? One patient at a time.
There's so much more that I wish that we had time to talk about, but for now, I think this is a very good start. And thank you. You've been a wonderful interviewer. And when this will eventually be able to be seen, then I think a lot of people have a lot to learn from it.
Oh, well, thank you. And I enjoyed our time talking today. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Pauline.